Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the most powerful platform for truth, bar none. Anywhere on God's green earth, this is your platform for elevation, education, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me on another edition of this show. Thank you for your time, because time is the most valuable commodity that any man, woman, or child could ever be blessed with. And once it's used up, you can never get it again. So I want to go into something we're supposed to have Colonel Larry Wilkerson with us, joining us in a few minutes, okay? But I want to say something to you all. This is the most sabotaged show on the planet. First, I want to give a shout out to my friend Larry Johnson. Yeah, I said it right, Larry Johnson. They deleted his YouTube channel and called him a threat, all right? And when they did it, he actually hit me up to let me know that they deleted his YouTube channel. All right. I've been having problems going on the air, today. Also, the links to Locals, Rumble, and another of the platforms that we on have been disconnected. So I just want to let you know that this is what we're going through right now as we try to stream this show live today. Okay. So you guys, please be patient with us and give Mr. Wilkerson a chance to get on the air. I don't know if they're breaking his link. I don't know what they're doing, but I know that they're trying to sabotage the show. But anyway, we got a lot of news to talk about. Shout out to Joel. Shout out to Net Rando. Shout out to Barabbas, Gizu. I think that's what. Shout out to M Sparks. Thank you all for joining me in the chat today. Let me highlight you guys for a minute. That's only right. All right, give me a second to highlight you guys. And Joel is giving that salute to the entire Red Pill family right here. He said, and we're in the building. We're waiting for Mr. Wilkerson to join us. I shot him an email to let him know that we're live, and I shot him a new link just in case they broke his link. Okay, so we got to wait and see if he gets that link right there. Sabotage something else. I was, and we're going to talk about the news, all right? But I have to say this. I was getting a personal, there's Mr. Wilkerson in the building right now. I'm so glad that he's joined. I'm going to bring him up on the screen right now, everybody. This guy is a wealth of information. Every time he accepts my invitation, I'm honored. This guy is a walking geopolitical encyclopedia, and I got to bring him on the screen right now. Mr. Wilkerson, how is it going today?
Well, it's been a tough morning, which is why I'm a minute or two late.
It's been a tough morning for me, too. They've been breaking the links to all of the other platforms. Larry Johnson informed me a few days ago, after he did the show with me. It wasn't 2 hours after he did the show with me that YouTube deleted his channel. So I was like, wow. But
yeah, they're doing that more and more now.
Yeah. I guess we're starting. The only, like a friend of mine says, when you know the dog that got hit by the rock when you throw it in the yard and that dog barks. So we know that the powers that be are getting hit by the rocks of truth because they're starting to bark and censor and scream and be outraged by truth, and they don't want any opposing view. Have you ever seen it like this since your time in the military, your time in government? Have you ever seen it so one-sided and so censored?
No, except right after 9/11, I think it was maybe the first couple of years, it was pretty bad. Pretty bad from a number of perspectives. You got glimpses into what the NSA was doing, the National Security Agency was doing. You got glimpses into what the FBI was doing, what the Attorney General was doing, and others. Merrick Garland the other day with the press conference on what the Russians are doing and so forth, that was totally unconstitutional. That was an abridgment of freedom of speech. His whole case was based on the government negating the constitutional provision for freedom of speech. And this was going on consistently and constantly when Dick Cheney said, essentially, we're going to have to operate on the dark side. Well, he meant that. And he meant we were going to spy on every American. We were going to spy on them in their home, in their bedroom, wherever it happened. We were going to listen to their phone calls. We were going to tap into Verizon. We were going to tap into AT&T. We were going to get the CEOs of those companies together, and we were going to get them to cooperate with us, which they did. We were going to listen to every American. We're going to interfere. When that dude went over to the Congress and said, we don't spy on Americans, he was lying through his teeth, lying through his teeth. And he should have been prosecuted for it afterwards, but he wasn't. I mean, when has anyone been held accountable for violating the Constitution against America's own citizens? When have they been held accountable for $21 trillion? Since 9/11, we have spent $21 trillion taxpayer dollars on wars, all of which we've lost. We have killed probably close to 15 million people. We have put another, I don't know how many millions into a diaspora, either internally displaced or externally out of their countries as refugees. For 20 years plus, we've been doing this, and no one's been held accountable. Not really. No one. Certainly not any president or vice president or secretary of defense or secretary of state or anyone of consequence has been held accountable. And in that whole time, we've been violating Americans' rights too. And we still are. We still are. You and I right now are being monitored by an algorithm, at least an algorithm at the National Security Agency. I suspect we're being monitored by a human being, not just an algorithm. That's the reality. There's no such thing as privacy anymore.
So Mr. Wilkerson, how can they do that on the one hand and then say the Communist Party of China is a dictatorship and there's no freedom of speech and there's no freedom of action in communist China, and yet they are implementing draconian laws back here in the United States?
That's a good question. But the hypocrisy of this government in particular, but the hypocrisy of all our governments since 9/11 is just astounding. How can we stand up and say, for example, as President Biden did, that we ought to go to Mongolia when President Putin visits there and arrest him for war crimes, when a far more guilty of war crimes individual, Bibi Netanyahu, visits the United States and speaks to our Congress to a record number of standing ovations and applause? I mean, is there any greater degree of hypocrisy that could exist than that? We're after Putin. We're after other tyrants in the world. And we let the biggest war criminal on the face of the earth right now, who's killed over, and this is the reality of it. It isn't 40,000. It isn't 50,000. It's probably close to 150, maybe even 200,000 Palestinians are under that rubble. They're dead. They're dead. Yesterday, I listened to a doctor who's been there for some time talk about walking into a room where babies were as far as she could see. They were in induced comas because of the injuries they'd received. And these were 3 to 5 year olds and babies. And she walked over to one to check on it, and maggots crawled out of its eyes. Maggots, because they can't do anything to slap the flies away themselves because they're in induced comas. And they don't have enough people to walk amongst all the beds, the cots really, and get the flies away. So the flies lay eggs in the baby's mouths and in their eyelids and such. And this is all happening with the United States of America sponsoring it, providing weapons for it, providing succor for the Israelis to do it. This is all as much our fault as it is the Israelis. And yet, who's holding anyone accountable for it?
Do you believe that it will be a regional war very soon in the Middle East? Because it seems like Bibi Netanyahu is hell-bent on it. It seems like there are no restraints on him. And it seems that the U.S. keeps stroking its ego and giving him free reign to do whatever he wants. And you can hit somebody and they can let it go. But if you keep hitting that person, you will force them into a fight or life situation. It seems like that is what he's doing in Syria. That's what he's Lebanon. That's what he's doing in Iraq. And that's what he's doing with Iran. Do you believe that there would be a war?
I think the reason the Central Command commander visited Israel recently was either one, to tell them that our assets can't remain in the Eastern Mediterranean forever, nor the North Arabian Sea forever, aircraft carriers, marine amphibious groups, things like that. Or he came there to say, get it over with. Do it and get it over with. And we've got your back. I suspect it was one of those two things. Netanyahu wants a war with Hezbollah. He wants a war with Hezbollah. And he's got tremendous pressure right now from the Israelis who had to evacuate their homes on that side of Israel. If those people are to go back to their homes, he has two choices. He either makes a deal with Hezbollah where they stop fighting each other, and I don't think that is even possible, or he invades Lebanon. So I'll give you which, you can have three guesses, and the first two don't count as to what he's probably going to do. And he's going to expect to have the U.S. behind him as he does this.
Mm-hmm. But that goes back to something that I was talking to another person about. The United States, she may be a wounded power, but she's still a great power nonetheless at this moment. But financially, she cannot maintain that readiness constantly, because that's a lot of money constantly that you have to spend on soldiers, on preparation, on deployment, all of this. How can BB ignore the tremendous financial strain on the United States when it says that it is an ally to the United States, but it is actually helping to bankrupt not only Israel, but the United States?
Well, you're absolutely correct. I don't think we care about it anymore. I really do not think we care about it anymore. The deficit spending has become a way of life. And as long as people buy our treasury notes, which might not be a whole lot longer, and as long as other people in the world are willing to sacrifice for our debt, then that can be done. But it's not going to happen infinitesimally. It's just not going to continue forever. So your point is well taken. The other aspect of it that truly troubles me is that we have spent, as I said, some 21 trillion taxpayer dollars on the wars that we've prosecuted ourselves since 9/11. Our aggregate debt moves towards $50 trillion. The interest payments on that debt, which are probably more in your face, certainly, than the aggregate debt, are going to equal in just a few short years. They're $1 trillion right now. Interest payments every year are $1 trillion. The equivalent of the defense budget. But they're going to be the equivalent of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the defense budget in less than 5 to 7 years. So once you renege on that, once you default on that, because you've got to pay that. You've got to pay that every year. Then your credit goes to hell and the rest of the world quits buying your treasury notes. So we are in trouble with that respect, but it's not enough trouble to grab people right now and force them to do corrective action. Look at the Congress. What are they doing? What are the two presidential candidates talking about? They're talking about tax cuts again. One's talking about tax cuts for, poor people. The other's talking about tax cuts for the wealthy. But it's tax cuts across the board. How do you call for tax cuts when you're in such colossal debt? Mm-hmm. And yet that's what's happening. On the other side of the coin, we are backing two wars right now. One proxy war in Ukraine and one war in Gaza, which couldn't be going on without us, that are distancing the world from us. They're causing the world to think we've gone insane. And when Putin goes around, for example, and tries to recruit friends and help and allies, he has little difficulty doing so. And Xi Jinping doesn't have much difficulty doing so either, because he's helping people right now. His Belt Road Initiative, his entire economic approach to the world, while we may criticize the hell out of it, and it does have some negative aspects, but not nearly as many negative aspects as our approach has, is winning people over. So not only are we basing everything right now on incredible deficit spending, but they're making a run on the dollar. And that run is probably going to be successful in the long term. We're going to see yuan-based, renminbi-based, Chinese currency-based, or some other currency-based approach to the world and its finances rather than the dollar. So when that happens, that's going to cause us even more trouble, because overnight our debt is going to go 4 or 5 times greater because our money's going to be worthless. So you're right. We're in serious trouble right now. We don't have any leadership that seems to recognize that. And the one that really troubles me is Congress, because when the founders put our country together, the Congress was the people's representatives. It was the closest body of government to the people. And there's a reason why they assign appropriations and the spending of our tax dollars to the House of Representatives and to no one else. And yet, look how profligate the House of Representatives has been. And look at the Speaker right now. He can't even forge a deal to get us out of the crisis we're in right now with regard to the budget. And no one's being held accountable. No one is held accountable, period.
So it looks like we're caught in a catch-22. I want to play something for you. Since you're talking about since you and I are talking about the financial state of the United States, and this is former President Donald Trump, and how he talks about tariffs, and he's talking about sanctions. And at the same time, he's acknowledging that if the U.S. is displaced as the dollar is displaced as the world's reserve currency, the United States has lost it. It's over with. But I want you to listen to him, because it seems like on the one hand, he's making a little sense, and on the other hand, it's nonsense. I mean, on one, he's explaining it, but to sanction nations is to interfere in their domestic and international policy. At the same time, it is to advance the empire. And I think nations are getting fed up with the sanctioning. And I think this is what is missed. The nations are fed up with being told what they can and cannot do, who they can and cannot be friends with, what they must do domestically and what they must do internationally, while they see the United States just trample what they demand of other people. I think that is being missed in here, but I want you to listen to what he says, because some of the stuff he says makes a little sense.
Ultimately, it kills your dollar, and it kills everything the dollar represents, and we have to continue to have that be the world currency. I think it's important. I think it would be losing a war if we lost the dollar as the world currency. I think that would be the equivalent of losing a war.
I would like to ask about the United States economic sanctions programs. These programs have been used, as you well know, to advance our national security interests, our foreign policy objectives, but they also have economic implications. And the most recent was the program against Russia in response to their invasion of Ukraine, where for once we got the support of all our allies. So my specific question is, would you strengthen or modify any of these economic sanctions programs, particularly Russia, including the pipeline you mentioned?
Well, it's a great question. The problem with what we have with sanctions, and I was a user of sanctions, but I'd put them on and take them off as quickly as possible, because ultimately it kills your dollar, and it kills everything the dollar represents, and we have to continue to have that be the world currency. I think it's important. I think it would be losing a war if we lost the dollar as the world currency. I think that would be the equivalent of losing a war. That would make us a third world country, and we can't let it happen. So I use sanctions very powerfully against countries that deserve it, and then I take them off, because look, you're losing Iran, you're losing Russia. China is out there trying to get their currency to be the dominant currency, as you know better than anybody. All of these things are happening. You're losing so many countries because there's so much conflict with all of these countries that you're going to lose that, and we can't lose that. So I want to use sanctions as little as possible. One of the things that we have with tariffs is that I'll say to them, you don't honor the dollar as your world currency. Is that right? You're not going to do it? No, we're not. I said, that's okay. I'm going to put tariffs all over your product. And they're going to say, sir, we'd love to honor the dollar as the world currency. You know, tariffs, in addition to monetary and the money that we'll take in, which will be bigger than you've ever seen in this country before. It gives you tremendous political power for something like that, as an example. I stopped wars with the threat of tariffs. I stopped wars with two countries that mattered a lot. A lot of people would have been killed. And I threatened tariffs coming into the United States if they don't make peace. And we made a lot of, we didn't have conflicts like you have right now. We had very intelligent people. But the biggest threat you have is you lose that currency, and we have lost something that you'll never get back. And we can keep it if we're smart, but they use it too much, and then they just forget about it. And these countries like Russia, it's going out now and doing its own thing, and you know, they're going out bragging about how they don't need us anymore, et cetera, et cetera. The sad part about Russia is that Ukraine would have never happened if I was president, so we wouldn't really have to be talking about sanctions. But it did happen. And one of the things I'm going to do, a little bit relevant to your question, is if we win, I believe I can settle that war while I'm president-elect. Before I ever get into office, I can get that war settled and get that war stopped, because it's a horrible, horrible war. And far more people are killed in Ukraine, far more people than you're realizing. They'll knock down this massive building, amazing, the size of these buildings, they'll knock it down. They'll say nobody was injured. No, a lot of people were killed. The real numbers are far greater than what people are looking at. So I think it's a very important thing. Sanctions have to be used very judiciously, and you can win. We have things much more powerful, actually, than sanctions. We have trade, but we cannot lose our dollar standard.
I know he rambled a little bit in different areas, but
a little bit. Was there anything he didn't cover?
So he let the cat out of the bag. If we lose the dollar as the world reserve currency, we become a third world nation. But if you have a competitive manufacturing and industries, then it wouldn't be as bad. But we don't have manufacturing, we don't have competitive industries. So to lose that means the end of the American empire. And I believe that is why the United States leadership is implementing all of these crazy policies. They're trying to throw something up against the wall to see if anything sticks to maintain hegemony. What do you say about it?
I think you're right to a certain extent. I see a lot of experimentation going on that makes no sense really as what it is, other than you put it up against what you just said, that they're crazy. They're trying to find some way out of this morass. What scares me the most about they're trying to find a way out of it, for example, the financial problems we're in, is that one of the ways they think to get out of it is war. And I'm not talking about a small war. I'm talking about a general war. I'm talking about a big war. And in that war, we would manage as we did, as they think, in 1942, 3, and 4, to revive our economy, revive our industrial base, revive our manufacturing base, and we would be able to come out of that war as we did out of World War II. Is again, you know, when we came out of World War II in 45, we had 51% of the world's gross domestic product, and most of that was manufacturing. A little bit of services, but most of it was manufacturing. Now we flipped the scale. We're almost totally services and minimally manufacturing. Now, even though we're minimally manufacturing, if you look at that percentage, the last time I looked, it was down as low as really hard manufacturing was down as low as 11%. Compare that with the 55 or 56, or even some would say, if you throw in everything, 70% in 1945. So it's flipped. It's services, you know, most of it's financial services, and manufacturing is a tiny part. But still, we're so big, that tiny part dwarfs a lot of the rest of the countries in the world's manufacturing sector. So there's that seed there that you could revive. And they think a war would do that. They think a war would do that. Look at Putin. Look at what Putin has done He's taken the war in Ukraine, smart man. He's now put an economist in as his minister of defense. And he's taken that war and he's more or less revived Russia's industrial base. Now, it was still lying there latent because it had not been totally destroyed after World War II and after their resurrection of it during the period after World War II, the hard, heavy industry in particular. And during the fire sales that we conducted of all the assets of the Soviet Union when the Cold War ended, and we sold it to all the oligarchs, and then the oligarchs basically raped, pillaged, and plundered it, except for the oil industry, the oil and gas industry, which was only thing holding Russia together economically. But now he's spread that out, and the war's allowed him to do that. He's got his heavy industry back. He's devoting about 7 or 8% of his GDP to reviving that heavy industry. He can now make tanks. He can now make ships. He can do things that we can't do, for example, not at any speed. He's smart. He's getting ready for what he thinks is coming, and that's a war with NATO. Mm-hmm. Do we want that? Do we want a war? I think sometimes when I look at what we're doing, we do, because we realize the dire straits we're in financially and economically. We realize that our primacy is fading every day. It fades a little bit. Our reputation is fading rapidly with things like our support for the war in Gaza. So what do? We want a big war. We want to repeat 1941 to 1945, and we want to come out the other end of it with everybody else derelict and hardly doing anything. Look at the end of World War II. Germany was prostrate. Russia was prostrate. Britain was prostrate. France was prostrate. Japan was prostrate. We were the only viable country in the world of significance. We dominated the world. Well, they want that again. And they think a war will bring that about.
But all of the barometers that measured that have changed. Do they sit down and think about that? China is the manufacturing juggernaut of the world. It is the economic juggernaut of the world. They can produce ships 500 times quicker than the United States can. Russia's economy has shown that it is more powerful than what the U.S. had gave it credit for. The industrial base is more prominent than the EU and the U.S. Industrial base right now, because we see it on the battlefield.
Absolutely.
Do the thinkers, the so-called think tankers, do they put all of that into their estimations about war? Because it seems like they just, whatever they don't agree with, they toss it to the wind, and then they stick with whatever that gives them a rosy scenario.
Yep. China has in its fishing fleet, deep sea fishing fleet, more ships than we have in our entire complement of ships. China has 6,000 armed fishing boats. These aren't small boats. Ask the Filipinos. When the Filipinos go out there around one of those reefs fishing in their little fishing boats, and the Chinese surround them with 30 of these boats, the Chinese are looking down from a 5-story building at the little Filipino boat down there, and there's 30 of them, and they're all armed. If you've seen the Chinese fleet line up off Haiphong Harbor, the fishing fleet, the deep sea fishing fleet, and this is only a portion of them, they stretch as far as you can see. China has more ships than any other country in the world by a huge margin. Their fishing fleet dwarfs the rest of the world's fishing fleets. And they're armed, as I said, many of them are armed. Yes, China is the real hegemon in the Pacific theater now, not the United States, not Japan, not Korea, China. And we can test that every time we sail through there and say we're doing freedom of navigation and that sort of thing. But if we really were to come to blows, we would probably, we'd take the hind part of the blows. We'd be devastated, I think. Why do we not recognize that? And why do we continue to insist on primacy, especially there, so far from home? Because we can't give it up. We simply cannot give it up. Our entire foreign policy, such as it is, our entire security policy, such as it is aimed at keeping our primacy. Well, you come to a point where if that primacy is being eroded by the will of the rest of the world and by your own profligacy in terms of financial management and your budget and all the other things that go into national power, you're at a crossroads. You've either got to tuck in and start trying to get yourself together again, or you've got to be bold and out there in the world saying that you are still who you were and hope everyone believes you. Sooner or later, there's going to be a coalition of people out there who don't believe you. And I think we've already created that coalition. I think it's called the BRICS. And there are others too that adhere to that. So the next 10, 15 years is going to be critical for the American empire. I'm not sure we're going to survive it and come out the other end looking anything like it right now.
I'm sorry, there was a delay on my end. I think we're having weather problems, and I was trying to let you know that there's a delay sometimes on my end because we're having a little weather problems. I want to ask you about. I'm in Pensacola, Florida.
Oh, okay. You're far enough from the hurricane where it didn't bother you, though, right?
Yeah, I'm in the first. I'm in the city of U.S. Naval. I think it says we are one of the first cities of the U.S. Navy or something like that. But I want to ask you about this provocation by the UK and the US, and I want you to listen to President Vladimir Putin when he is being asked about this provocations of sending deep strike weapons to Ukraine for the use on Russian territory. Right. And I'm about to play it right here. Let's see. I think this is it right here.
There is an attempt to substitute concepts because we are not talking about allowing or forbidding the Kiev regime to strike our territory. It already does that with the help of drones and other means. But when we are talking about the use of precision weapons, long-range Western-made weapons, it is a completely different story. The fact is that I have already mentioned this, and any experts will confirm it, both in our country and in the West. The Ukrainian army is incapable of striking with modern Western-made long-range precision systems. It can only do that by using intelligence from satellites, which Ukraine does not have. They get the data only from EU satellites or from the United States. In general, from NATO satellites. That's the first thing. The second and very important thing, maybe the key one, is that the flight missions in these missile systems can, in fact, be inputted only by NATO military personnel. Ukrainian servicemen cannot do this. So it's not a question of allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It is a question of deciding whether or not a NATO country could be directly involved in a military conflict. If this decision is made, it will mean nothing else but the direct participation of NATO countries, the United States, European countries in the war in Ukraine. This is their direct participation. And this already, of course, significantly changes the very essence, the very nature of the conflict. It will mean that NATO countries, the United States, European countries are at war with Russia. And if that is the case, then having in mind the change in the very essence of this conflict, we will take appropriate decisions based on the threats that will be presented to us.
But earlier, I discussed the issue of a potential wider conflict between NATO and Russia with a panel of guests.
Whatever country is at war with the US and Russia helps them to strike US territory, I think there would not be a discussion whether Russia is part of this war. So I think the West is already active part of the war for a long time, because from international law, and we have this from the experts of the German Bundestag, of the German Parliament, even sharing intelligence data, operative data, intelligence data is already participation of the war.
In my point of view, this present regime in Washington wants an escalation because they are, in my sense, very afraid of the new elections where Kamala Harris has hardly a chance to get president. And with Donald Trump regaining the White House, it means that many criminal elements in the United States will face criminal charges. And these, what they sometimes call the deep state, is very scared of this. So it could be that they try to escalate the Ukraine war to declare martial law, and with martial law they could get around an election, but I doubt that this will work out.
If the West is risking this escalation, I'm afraid there might be a Russian reaction with which the West doesn't like, and then we are coming really in a real process of escalation steps. And whether we find a way out before the unthinkable would happen, I don't know. Really, the West has to think whether it's worth to risk a world war, a real hot world war, because of all these questions we have here. Attacking Russia with long-range Western weapons, which technically Putin is right, would be managed and programmed by Western, by NATO soldiers, is, I think, a step which is, the final one at which the Russians will react, what they didn't do until now.
All right, AK, let me come to you now.
First of all, aren't NATO troops, so-called mercenaries, manning the HIMARS and the British weapons and stuff? Why is this more of an escalatory step? And I know why, but I have to ask this for the people that is viewing this. Why is this more of an escalatory step with the long-range deep strike weapons?
Well, there are some contractor personnel, and I suspect there are some U.S. military personnel helping Ukraine with some of the more sophisticated weaponry, and increasingly probably with U.S. satellite intelligence for guidance of those weapon systems or for reconnaissance. But what Putin said is very, very dramatic, and it's correct. It's both dramatic and correct. And that is that if we do what we're saying we're going to do, what Blinken hinted at, what Lloyd Austin hinted at, and what Joe Biden hinted at, and more than hinted, then NATO has entered the war. And there's no doubt about it. There's just simply no question about it. And then it becomes Putin's decision as to what to do about it. Now, were I probably would start on the low end of the scale. I would start attacking NATO targets outside of Ukraine. That is to say, I would attack them in Poland. I would attack them in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Germany, maybe. I'd probably save that for the last. But I would go tit for tat. Every time a missile uses U.S. NATO intelligence and hits deep in Russia, I would respond with the same thing at a NATO target. If Putin wants to, he can escalate even further, and he would be perfectly within the what I would call the established rules of warfare in terms of proportionality and international law. I would ratchet it up even further than that and still be within those rules. And I would take something out fairly significant in a NATO country, and I would make my point and stop and see where NATO goes. This is what we call dangerous escalation, because once somebody does A and you do B and they do C and you do D, you wind up somewhere in there probably contemplating the use of small yield nuclear weapons or worse. And that's what we've been talking about all along, the potential for this conflict to escalate into a general regional war between NATO and Russia and ultimately go nuclear. Because the Russians have said, and Putin and Sergei Lavrov have been very clear about this, if you bring the full weight of NATO to bear on Russia, then we will go nuclear. We will go nuclear in accordance with our doctrine, if you will, which is sort of, it sounds insane, escalate to de-escalate. In other words, we will hit you with nuclear weapons in a way that will be convincing, and we hope you'll stop and you won't hit us back with nuclear weapons. But all of our doctrinal analysis and our studies during the Cold War indicated that that was probably a forlorn hope, that once you started using nuclear weapons, the ladder just sort of automatically ascended, and you wound up in a general nuclear exchange. And that means strategic nuclear weapons coming across at both countries. That would be a disaster for mankind. Putin said it. He said they seem to have the idea in Washington, and maybe London and Berlin too, that the war could be confined to Europe. Hint, 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 it won't be. This is a very dangerous thing we're doing. And I cannot think that anyone in Washington is giving this truly serious, sane thought. If they are, then they need to be in an asylum, and it needs to be an asylum for the mentally disturbed, because this is not something we should be doing. This is Ukraine in the first place was not something we should be doing. But I understand, I've been around a while, I understand why we're doing it. We're making a ton of money off of it. We're bleeding Russia. They've lost some 200,000 plus soldiers. Ukraine has probably lost twice that many. So we're bleeding Ukraine to get at Russia. But it's time to stop. It's time to bring this conflict to a halt, to have a ceasefire and peace negotiations. And I don't care about the American election, really. I understand Kamala Harris and Joe Biden think they never get elected if they cut and run, if they're perceived as cutting and running. But I'm looking at the polls of the American people. And the American people are split right now. They're probably about 50-50 on whether or not we should be doing what we're doing in Ukraine, and particularly whether we should be giving so many billions of dollars to them. So if you can't do it before the election, then do it right afterwards. But the problem with that is, what is right afterwards? Do you know what right afterwards is? If Donald Trump loses by just a small amount, we might be months, if not years, before we settle it. And we might have some things to do in the streets before we settle it. So you want to take America's attention off these two wars that are bloody-minded and stupid and costing us a lot in reputational value and in money and everything else. You want to take attention off that. Well, let's have a revolution in this country. Let's have Donald Trump, for example, lose by 1 percentage point or 2 percentage points, and then contest it and watch his people come into the street and watch what happens, which might make January the 6th look like a sideshow. So we've got a lot of problems right now. If it were me and I were in the presidency, I'd do something to shut down one of these theaters of war very quickly. And I think Ukraine would be the one that would present the most opportunity to do so. And let's look at the Ukrainian position for a moment. Zelensky is illegal. He's illegal. He's not elected. He's gone past his time. He declared martial law to kind of keep him in there as the dictator. But I'm told by people whom I trust, and I'm told by polls, that were Zelensky to stand right now, he'd lose. So why doesn't he want to do away with the martial law and elect a new leader who'll have more legitimacy than he does? Well, he doesn't, because that leader would probably win, because he would promise to sue for peace immediately and to stop the killing. So we're in a real trick bag here, and we don't seem to know how to extricate ourselves from it. And Zelensky doesn't want to. I mean, what's he going to do? He's got a dacha in Albania, I understand it. He's got one somewhere else, $1 million home, $1 million home. So he could get out of there and be
Miami.
Yeah, but he wants to hang. He wants to hang there till the very last minute. I think he's going to hang there until a bullet hits him.
You've been so gracious with your time, Mr. Wilkerson. I just want to close with this. With the financial situation that America and the European Union both are facing, and with the multiple wars, the threat of war and the multiple wars that are being fought covertly and overtly, do you believe that America can make it another year or two without the wheels falling off?
I'm beginning to think that there's a real high potential for the wheel falling off. And it's not just this election season, but it's the debt, it's the wars, it's the lack of attention to the state of their republic by the American people in general. And it's the situation we've created in the world, which is now growing daily. I mean, every 24-hour period that goes by, there's some more antagonism in the world that grows towards us. And Putin and Xi and other leaders are taking advantage of that. Just look at Turkey for a second. Turkey anchors the southern flank of NATO. Turkey may leave NATO as an official act any day now. Turkey has already said it's with the BRICS. Turkey has already said it's given up on the EU. Turkey has already said it really doesn't like what's going on in Gaza. Erdogan is probably on the verge of making a momentous decision for a very important country that, as I said, anchors the southern flank of NATO. What does NATO do when Turkey leaves and says, bye? And this is just one example of the things that are evolving that we don't seem to be paying any attention to. But I'll guarantee you that Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and probably the Ayatollah and the IRGC and the Guardian Council in Iran, and for that matter, Modi in India and Erdogan in Turkey and others are paying attention to, Lula in Brazil. They are saying, we're crazy. We're physically insolvent. We're crazy. We're involved in wars we shouldn't be involved in. We're watching babies with maggots in their eyes in Palestinian facilities. I won't call them hospitals because they're all bombed to bejesus, the hospitals. We're losing it. We're losing it. We still got a lot of residual power. We still got a big country. We still got two big oceans. We got fairly benign neighbors on our top and bottom. We've got an ideal situation for correcting it all and getting our act together. But we don't seem to have the leadership capable of doing that. And the American people don't seem to be alert enough to force them to do it.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful discussion, Mr. Wilkerson. Thank you again for your time. You are so gracious. You went over the time allotted to me, and I really, really appreciate it because these issues must be addressed because there's so many people that don't understand why America continues to run against the wall and say, hey, I'm going to break the wall down instead of going around the wall. They continue to go 100 miles an hour directly at the wall. And I want to thank you for your time, your insight, and your understanding.
When you're in a hole, first thing is to stop digging.
Boom. Right on. Thank you, Mr. Wilkerson, for joining us. Be blessed, be safe.
Thank you. You too. You too.
Everybody. Okay. Everybody, we've had Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson on the show. Again, we're going to have, we're supposed to have former Serbian captain Mihailovic on the show in the coming weeks. Demetrius Laskaris. We have a few more others coming up. Please join us, and we're going to have live streams. I want to say this to my Patreons. I was trying to do a live stream. I got it got erased. I don't know what's going on. I contacted Patreon. They're correcting something. I tried to do a channel member stream last night. YouTube, man, you guys suck, man. I'm telling you. I want to thank everybody for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on God's green earth. Thank you. You did not have to allot your time for this show. So from the bottom of my heart to the depth of my soul, I want to tell each and every one of you, looking you directly in the eyes, thank you. And I really appreciate the time that you have allotted to me. So you've trusted me with your time, and I hope that I have proven myself worthy of your trust with giving you alternative views, information, and understanding. On that note, know that I love each and every one of you if you love truth, but know that the love that I have for you will pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. And remember to do right by others, not because other people are watching, but because it's the right thing to do. Because even when others aren't watching, God always has his eyes open. That's what my mother told me. She shared it with me, and I'm sharing those nuggets of wisdom with you. Hey, mama, guess what? Your baby boy still loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. I'm out of here. Thank you all. Peace.